everyone. I'm Stephen Robinson, or the Play Typer guy, as my son calls me. Today, I'm with Lily Axelrod, a attorney who has her own firm down in Memphis, Tennessee. And I just actually, you're not a fellow Southerner like myself. One, could you tell me about starting your firm down there and what brought you down there? And then Lily is an immigration lawyer, and I'm very excited to hear about the work you do.
Sure. So as the real true Southerners would call me, I'm a Yankee girl. I was born and raised in the college town of Ann Arbor, Michigan, where neither of my parents were from, but found each other there at the University of Michigan. And in college, by happenstance, I met this very charming and handsome guy from Mississippi. I wasn't trying to get serious, but sometimes you meet the right person and um, shortly after I graduated college, found myself living in Mississippi for a year while he finished his degree. We lived in Memphis for a couple of years. I dragged him up north for law school. That didn't take. He wasn't into the snow. And so in 2016, we decided to make our way back down to Memphis. And I had the fortune and honor to go back to work for the law firm where I had actually been a paralegal here at Sisk & Susser, which is an immigration law firm also based here in Memphis. So I worked there for many years, fabulous folks. And last year decided, it was time to go out on my own and start my own firm.
So you run, it's called Axelrod, appropriately enough, Axelrod Immigration Law, a boutique immigration firm. Let's see, the law firm serving the globe from Memphis, Tennessee, and you handle family-based immigration and humanitarian applications and deportation defense. Can you just sort of give a sort of 50-foot view of what specifically the kind of cases you handle and where they would apply in Memphis?
Sure. So I handle deportation cases mostly before the Memphis Immigration Court. So that's anybody from Tennessee, Arkansas, northern Mississippi, and sometimes Kentucky, who find themselves in deportation proceedings. So that includes, folks who have recently entered without permission, folks who have had their green card for many years, but are being challenged by ICE for a number of reasons. So I work in the immigration courts. I also do family-based petitions. So, someone who is maybe a U.S. citizen petitioning for their spouse or their parent, and humanitarian cases, including asylum and special protections for children who have been abused or neglected, survivors of domestic violence, gender-based violence, and other crimes, and survivors of human trafficking. And then in the last couple of years, I've also started suing the government. So I'm working in federal court, which is nominally more of a real court than immigration court, suing the government for improper interpretation of immigration laws or just unfair and unreasonable delays. Because as anyone who's been involved with any facet of the immigration system in the last decade knows, the system is an inefficient mess at best. At getting just basic adjudications done.
And just to sort of some of the cases you've been working on, I was reading an article that you'd been quoted in regarding how ICE had almost deported a 10-year-old cancer survivor and his mother. Can you tell us a bit about this? Because that is I was praying that it wasn't the headline, but it seems to be that was the headline. That is what happened.
Yes. So fortunately, they are still here and they're still in the process of applying for their green card. Normally, of course, as an attorney, I can't share much detail about specific cases, but because my client and her family did choose to speak up and speak out to media, and they gave me permission to do the same. So this is a young woman from Honduras and her son who had very serious cancer and was being treated in St. Jude, which of course is the wonderful children's research hospital we have here in Memphis. And luckily, St. Jude was able to put his cancer into remission, and he was receiving ongoing care and follow-up and social services from St. Jude here in the Memphis area. But because they had come in without permission and had had their asylum case denied by the Memphis Immigration Court, unfairly in my opinion, but because they were not successful with their asylum application, they did have orders of deportation against them, both mom and son, from the Memphis Immigration Court, which means technically at any time ICE has the legal authority to detain and deport them. However, mom had married a US citizen who was in the process of petitioning for both of them. So when you have a deportation order, but you're married to a US citizen, it can be a complicated process. They don't just hand you a green card, as some folks might assume. So they were in the process of applying for her green card. My client was checking in with ICE periodically, so they were aware that her son was getting treated at St. Jude and that she was in the process through her husband. And then one day she came into what she thought was going to be a standard, one of these check-ins with ICE to make sure they've got her address updated and are aware of the status of her case. And instead of that, they end up taking her and her son, detaining them and sending them. They were about to put them on a deportation flight. I still have not gotten ICE to explain to me why, in particular, this family at this time, for this reason, for whatever reason, that didn't make a lot of sense, other than that they can, right? So I think folks associate this type of story with, or they want to associate this type of story with, oh, that's the kind of thing the Trump administration would do. But no, the ICE machine operates under Biden as well, and their position is that if someone has a deportation order, they can, go ahead and enforce it and get their statistics up for the month. And folks who are regularly checking in with them and who already have a deportation order are perhaps easier to kick out of the country.
Mm-hmm.
So this family was very lucky that that her husband realized that, what should have been a quick check-in, his wife hadn't come home. And so we were lucky that he got in contact with me in time for me to get in contact with ICE. And the initial response that I got from ICE, I said, are you aware that you have a St. Jude patient, cancer survivor, who is in the process of applying for green card, child in detention? And the person I spoke to said, no, I was not aware. Let me look into that. And then the initial response I got was, well, they have a deportation order, so, nothing we can do. So I, fortunately, through some pushing, was able to, I'm not sure exactly why they decided to go back on the nothing they can do, but an officer did go to the airport, and from the Memphis airport, instead of boarding them on that plane, we're able to bring them home. So that was, of course, a very disturbing and experience for the child and for mom and for the whole community to see that, although ICE doesn't have the power and resources to deport everyone, that they can still, use their force in that way in the community.
And there are so many stories like this, and something that I think often gets lost. So it's not illegal to seek asylum, if I'm right. Like
exactly.
And that's always been presented somehow as they're breaking the law, these immigrants seeking asylum.
Exactly. So the law says that any person inside the United States or presenting themselves at the border or a port of entry, at the airport or at a border checkpoint or wherever it may be, has the right to seek asylum from persecution based on their race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group, which is kind of a funny category, but that can include, for example, if you might be persecuted for being gay or trans in your country, if you're being persecuted because of membership in your family. Those are some common examples. So even if somebody comes to the country without prior authorization, without a visa, they are entitled to apply for asylum, and it's not illegal to do so. So of course, the the asylum right that comes out of the Refugee Convention, which in turn came out of the aftermath of World War II, and was designed, to be an international agreement to make sure that genocide like we saw under Hitler would never happen again. And as part of our obligation, we need to have a fair process for accepting refugees and processing their cases. And it's funny that I'm talking to you about this. Tomorrow I'm going to hop on a plane and go home to Michigan for Passover, which is the Jewish holiday celebrating our exodus from Egypt thousands of years ago, which I think is for many Jewish people like myself who work with immigrants and asylees and refugees. That annual retelling of the Exodus from Egypt, we are called to imagine ourselves being present in that moment of escape, in that moment of transition out of slavery, and to appreciate our freedom in every generation. And so this is, for me, part of my calling of why I think it is important for our country now, which did welcome my family several generations ago, also fleeing persecution. I can be part of doing the same for the next generation.
Yes, and it's always pleasant, especially in these times, to see religious faith expressed as a means of, I guess, being kind, as opposed to sometimes the opposite. I've always felt like you don't really need religion to be a jerk. It's kind of sort of an easy thing to do.
You don't need religion to be a jerk, and you don't need religion to be a good person either. But I defined the Jewish intellectual and religious tradition, informs, and I hope is a benefit to the way that I see the world and my family's place in it.
Oh, absolutely. And I totally agree. I mean, I don't think I'm not a particularly religious person. I believe that my morality is outside of that. It just, but to me, to bully someone, I was like, but I need to bully you because of my religious faith always seems weird to me. It's sort of, sometimes it's like, oh, I'm, if you're human, right? I'm tired. I don't necessarily want to open my doors to people, or maybe there's not enough resources, the things we hear. And sometimes I get the idea that people who sort of feel like there's something greater to themselves calling them to do something that's perhaps not their first instinct, but sometimes being a jerk is kind of like, oh, why do you need a whole thing for that? But something you'd mentioned about go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say that, in the Passover Seder, we often read, there's several times in Exodus, we hear a variation on be kind to the stranger in your midst, for you were a stranger in the land of Egypt. And that exhortation doesn't necessarily require any kind of religious faith to recognize that all of us have ancestors who at some point were new to a place or were among unfamiliar people. And if we are on the flip side of that now, we can be the welcome that our ancestors had hoped for and maybe did or didn't receive.
So Lily, I know you can't talk about ongoing cases or anything, but just in a general sense, because to help people kind of understand the asylum process, because we described the different areas or groups that you could apply upon. So that's still, someone has to kind of be like, okay, well, your asylum is approved. And the reason I ask this is kind of, let's say you feel persecuted in Florida, you're someone who's under, or Texas or whatever law. I presume you can't just show up in, let's say, another country that has perhaps better laws than those and say, can I stay here now? This will be better for my family. Will they just say, oh no, America's great? Like, so what are to sort of clarify, like, what are the standards before someone says, no, you are being persecuted?
Right. I mean, in theory, an American can apply for asylum elsewhere, and you have to show that either you have a well-founded fear of persecution in the future, and that it's either the government that's persecuting you or a non-state actor that the government can't or won't protect you from. And so that the nexus to a connected ground, that connection between the why of the persecution and then the failure of state protection, those are often used as an excuse to deny asylum seekers from Central America, because a lot of
Hmm.
judges will say, a lot of folks are fleeing domestic violence, gender-based violence, and or persecution by international armed criminal groups. And some immigration judges will say, well, the government of Honduras is trying to end domestic violence, or they put out this
Hmm.
proclamation saying that it's illegal to, do X, Y, or Z, and so therefore, why didn't you stay and have the government protect you? Much more so if an American were going, to another country trying to apply for asylum. Seeing some of the hatred and bullying and violence toward, especially towards trans folks now, I can I can empathize with some Americans who might want to um, seek safety elsewhere, even as I represent trans and non-binary clients here who have faced persecution in their homelands.
Hmm. Um, and you talked about this is something that the Biden administration has been doing deportations. Obviously, I think the Obama administration did a lot. I mean, the Trump administration sort of, perhaps I would, my opinion, reveled in the cruelty. Like that was sort of, as the saying goes, cruelty was the point. But
Yeah.
one thing that seems to have happened, in my view, during the Trump administration was sort of an exacerbate, like politicizing the process and exacerbating that process to it. Have you noticed any pressure? Because if you're it's like a judge or whatever granting asylum, it seems now it's more like, okay, well, this person, something absurd, okay, you granted asylum to this person who was in a car accident and a young girl died and this is all your fault. It just seems like everything has been like anything, a sort of a bias against any type of immigration into the country, because anything that would happen we're going to hold against the people who let this happen.
Right. There has always been in both political parties, sometimes attempts to play on xenophobia of voters, right? And
Hmm.
it's very convenient to blame people who don't vote for the problems of people who do, right?
Yeah.
Um, and there's also the political nature of asylum in particular. You see it especially with the Cuban Adjustment Act, which basically said Cubans don't have to apply for asylum if they get here, no matter how they get here. If they are, if an officer lets them in, which until recently they almost always did, then they can apply for a green card after a year. They don't have to apply for asylum. Just with Cuban nationality, they're good to go. That's a simplification, but and so seeing that, okay, from this particular communist country, we have basically a fast track asylum with no requirement to prove the individual facts of a case. Whereas if you're fleeing, right wing dictatorship, you're you're not going to have any welcome mat rolled out for you, which isn't to denigrate, Cubans who took the risk and came here, but that was sort of certainly a political decision to
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's you it
what kind of countries we and then seeing the Biden administration, I was very, what's the word, jaded, skeptical, during the campaign. I was like, there's no way that this guy's going to be any better than Obama. I'll believe it when I see it. And then in the early days, in the first like 2 weeks of the administration, he put out a lot of very strong um, promises on immigration, which, he's not going to keep all of the promises. But to me, it showed that he was working with smart people, that he had specific ideas for good changes in the system, almost none of which have
mhm.
come to pass. And I don't know who he thinks that who does he think that he's winning over? Like, are House Republicans going to vote for comprehensive immigration reform because they see him deport a St. Jude kid? Like, who? Why? What is? If the cruelty isn't the point, then what is the point?
Well, they talk about how there's a border crisis, I believe. Recently, Ted Cruz had a whole showboating event where he was basically just screaming at the head of the DHS and saying he should resign disgrace, and that implying that he's responsible for sex trafficking and all of this, and just sort of the rhetoric is such that I do believe that, and I've read this regarding the Obama administration as well, this idea of like, okay, well, if we are tough on this, similar to like being tough on crime, sort of a democratic thing, that if we are tough, if we show that we're tough, they will they won't keep saying this, except they
Right.
do, right?
That's never, you're, in my opinion, you're never going to win Republicans over by being tough on anything, right? You're not going to get criminal justice reform with more policing. You're not going to get immigration reform with more criminalization of immigrant communities and more deprecation of human rights law. There's no amount of cruelty that's going to get people like Ted Cruz and Tom Cotton to say, "Oh yeah, okay, now we're going to not be racist." The the I think the change has to happen and is happening, and I give all the respect and credit to immigrant-led organizations, and a lot of you know folks just on the ground educating their own communities and their own neighbors about what is the law really, and why is it that way, and we should why no human being is illegal, why we
Mhm.
need immigration, why it's good for our country, why has it always been good for our country, that kind of, just the way that I think we've come so far on LGBT rights in the last few years. Maybe LGBT, we're still working on the T more, but by folks coming out to their families and communities, and more folks knowing somebody who is gay, and having that human to human connection. I think that the folks doing that with immigration are, and also
Mhm.
putting serious pressure on Democratic politicians to make good on their promises. I think it's that kind of organizing is going to move the needle in a way that punishing asylum seekers is never going to.
Yeah, and I've read about this again in the Obama administration, and then prior to that in the Clinton administration, examples of where they felt like, oh, we went so far either on tax policy or criminal justice policy or here, and we gained nothing. Like there was no that we were still attacked as much as we had done little. And and please forgive the analogy. But I couldn't help thinking of the scene in Schindler's List where he's, I can, if I sold this one ring, I could have saved more lives or whatever. Because when you were talking about statistics earlier with ICE, and these statistics, these numbers, these are human lives. Like this child of cancer, and these are lives. And I'm not. It's one thing to be like, this life, here's the political benefit we got from this, but but when there's but when there's nothing, it just seems even more tragic, right? Like it just
Right.
seems like, okay, well, this didn't get us to comprehensive immigration reform, or this did, like, you weren't able to say, okay, this is tragic, this happened to this child, or almost happened, but it got us help with
Right.
the dreamers. They're still trying to deport dreamers. So it's I don't know, what do you, so from your sense on the ground, like, where, if things were working as you would like to see, perhaps from people seeking asylum and from the government's reaction to that, where would be the political loss? Because Republicans would still be saying there's a border crisis, right? So if we were just more
Right.
humane, I mean, what is the risk? Because I mean, there must be some. Like, I'm trying to sort it out. Like, what is
Right. I
the
mean, I'm
risk?
not a political
Sure,
strategist, right? I can sit here all day and say Democrats should do this and that, but
but I guess,
I
yeah,
don't see what, Republicans are going to be mad and racists are going to be racists. Helping them isn't
yes,
going to make that, what do you get back? We're still
yeah,
sitting with the 1996 immigration reform was the last big immigration reform that we had under Clinton, as you mentioned, and we're still sitting with some of the awful effects of that. That's that law that's preventing a lot of parents of U.S. citizen children from getting their green cards. It's preventing a lot of folks just with old misdemeanor convictions from getting green cards. It's keeping a lot of people undocumented who, they don't have an asylum case, but they have their entire life here in the community, and As I talk to folks here in the South, obviously there's like a range of political orientations around me here in Memphis, but I think I talk to a lot of folks who, once they realize, oh, okay, this immigrant that I know who's been here 20 years and is my neighbor, and my kids go
Mhm.
to school with his kids, he doesn't have his green card, why not? And once they actually realize, oh, like the law is stupid, the law shouldn't be that way, they, that can move the needle in people's perception when they see the human
Yeah,
cost.
I
That's not separate, that's, oh, excuse me, go ahead.
no, no, no. When I was asking about because there's all this, again, the rhetoric is often jobs and crime, and Trump was pushing both of those, right? And so it just, from what I've studied, um, the economic issues that people legitimately were having, especially working class poor people, let's say working class whites specifically, who were being receptive to Trump's
Hmm.
they're not at risk from people seeking asylum. They're not the reason. These people aren't the reason they're not getting the jobs they want. From the studies I've been reading, and same with the crime. It's not the people see. It's not like a wave of rapists and murderers seeking asylum, but that's what is being out there. And it just seems that I'm not. How much is but it's none of it. Again, it's none of it's true. And that's what's
Right.
always so
I mean,
baffling
there's
to me.
not right. I mean, I'm not an economist either, but there's not a fixed set of jobs, right? Immigrants create jobs. People coming to work, that's not a zero-sum game. And violence on the border, by which I mean state violence, right? Policing of the border, militarization of the border, cracking down on asylum seekers, that creates crime on the border. There don't need to be coyotes and drug cartels involved in getting people over the border if there is a safe and orderly system for folks to apply for asylum lawfully or to petition for their families abroad lawfully, right? Are there, you know, are there people coming to the border who have been convicted of crimes or been involved in crimes in their home countries in the past? Sure, immigrants are people, right? Immigrants are human, and like everybody else, they're going to be,
Mhm.
you're, no judge wants to be the judge that, granted a green card for somebody who then, the next year is in prison for some horrible crime, and then they look back and, see who let that guy in, right? So there's that fear among adjudicators. But you look at the statistics of non-citizens commit, including those who have no status, commit crimes at a lower rate than citizens do, and that's even not accounting for the fact that they are tending to be over policed. The over policing of Black communities, of Latino communities, of Arab communities in the U.S. is going to, even giving that skews the statistics, right? Even giving that, a lot of my Latino clients and Black immigrant clients are, wound up in immigration proceedings basically for driving while brown, for being pulled over for a whole lot of nothing, and then getting sent over to ICE. So even given that the statistics are already skewed for non-white immigrants, there is just no truth to the claim that they are committing crimes at any higher rate than citizens are. But again, like immigrants are humans. Immigrants are people. They shouldn't have to
Mhm.
justify their existence by bringing in X dollars or by being saints, right? I'm
Absolutely.
not a saint. I'm a human and a citizen, and I hold our immigrant neighbors to that same standard, right? I'm always nervous about trying to justify humanity or humane policies by saying, but here's an example of the perfect immigrant, or why all immigrants are perfect, right? They're
Oh yeah. I totally agree. I get the politics of why that happens, especially I think recently Republicans have been more inclined to, I think it was called like angel victims, or people who literally were either harmed or murdered by immigrants or illegal immigrants. And so they've really been trying to sort of demonize this group. So I think Democrats have been trying to balance that, but you say, with sort of the model minority. From
Right.
my perspective, obviously, model minority is a zero sum. We saw that, I think, in Nashville, where one person shooting up a school because their gender identity was constantly identified as the transgender shooter, even though
Right.
so many transgender people did not murder people last week. And so it is very tough when everyone's human, everyone's going to make mistakes, but you're kind of like anyone's going to certain bad actors going to seize upon any one individual who steps out of line to then kind of smear everyone else in that group, which is
Yes, exactly.
unfortunate.
If a straight white dude hits up a school, it's not, wow, what's wrong with straight white men? Or, you
No.
may hear that on the fringes, but that's not like, wow, straight men, white men have a, you know, have a problem with violence, even though that is the great majority of perpetrators of mass shootings in the US. But as you say, anyone who is a part of some kind of minority group, there's always that going to be that narrative of hate toward the entire group, or seeing that as being reflective of the entire group. And that's, we all have our biases as human nature to put labels on people who are not like us. And nobody is perfect, but I hope it's something that we can be aware of and not fall prey to when we see it happening.
Mhm. So Lily, I'd love to know what called you to this work specifically. I mean, you'd kind of spoken to this earlier, but you just have this tremendous background. You graduated with honors from Harvard, and then you were working at Sisk and Susker, which is one of America's leading immigration law firms. But presumably, specifically, this is type of work you had wanted to get involved in. So, for how long have you wanted to pursue this?
I've been interested in immigration ever since I can remember. My grandmother was an immigrant from Poland, and I have some adorable tapes of me trying to interview her when I was younger and wasn't asking all of the right questions. But I had that interest from my family history, and then I was lucky to have some excellent Spanish teachers and some opportunities to travel in Latin America. Um, and as I, got to know Latin American immigrants in my own community, and then got to know Latin America traveling a little bit, um, I, I I began to connect some of my family history to what I was seeing around me in the present day, and hoping that I could have a career. I thought that I was going to be working like in immigration policy. Maybe I swore up and down, I'm never going to law school. I'm not going to be a lawyer. No way, no how. Um, but in high school, I
Everyone
did an
says
internship.
that.
Yes, everyone says that, and I don't want to be one of those lawyers who's like, "Don't be a lawyer. It's terrible." I mean, I love my job; it's fabulous, but it's very stressful. Um, but I did an internship in high school with a refugee social services organization, and kind of designed my undergraduate studies around immigration. And I tried community organizing, and with great respect, learned that that was not for me. um, did not have the talent for the community organizing as a professional in the nonprofit space. And as I was doing that, I was finding that as an organizer, when I was getting the kinds of calls that had me most passionate, were the ones that I was handing off to an immigration attorney. Someone calling me and saying, ICE is at my door, what do I do? Or this bill is being proposed in the Mississippi legislature, what would it actually do? How would it affect my case? Or we're hearing about raids in this area targeting Latinos, what can we do? So as I was sort of handing those cases off to immigration lawyers, I thought, maybe that is a place where I could contribute my skills and still be connected to this work.
And you said your grandmother was from Poland, so obviously that was it was wonderful that she was able to get. I mean, not to put too fine a point on that, but the folks who were able to escape the situation there is,
Yes.
we're always very grateful.
So I actually learned after she died, we found an essay that my grandmother had written with a story that I did not know. So she came with her mother's family, with her father's family, and most of her mother's family stayed behind. So this was just before World War One. And her mother's family all perished in the Holocaust, except for one uncle who, in just after the war, was trying to come to the U.S. to reunite with his family. But the U.S., of course, was not taking any European refugees at that time, and even those who had, citizen family members. And so he got on a boat to Panama, crossed from Panama all through Central America, and according to my grandmother, was arrested at the U.S.-Mexico border and was deported, and wound up settling in Ecuador. So you think of people trying to, seek asylum and enter illegally at the border, and immigration detention and deportation as a brand new thing, but it certainly isn't. And when I went to Ecuador, I tried to find that branch of my family and was not successful. So altars in Ecuador, if there are any of you, let me know.
Yeah, and whenever I've studied the Holocaust and World War II history, it seems tautological state, but the how little time there is between World War One and World War II. We're talking, it's not a lifetime. So you could, so it's something of where if you were a child, then things could get very, very bad, and you're still relatively young when it was happening. And it's sort of this period where so much occurred within a couple decades that went very poorly. And that's something that is always stuck in my mind when looking at all the things that happen, even in America. Like you can't take for granted like how
Yeah.
quickly things can accelerate.
And about 100 years ago at that time was one of the first very restrictive immigration laws. In the early 20th century, immigrants were a larger percentage of the US population than they are now. And that's, some of the same things we're seeing now, some of the xenophobia of, how come those people are still speaking their foreign language, and they're poor, and they're taking our jobs, and they're not white, or not white enough. All of these same tropes that we're hearing now 100 years ago is what led to some of the immigration restrictions in the 1920s, which is one of the reasons why in the 30s, when it became very clear that that Jewish people and others were about to be subject to great violence for their identity, that they weren't able to come to the U.S. So those of us who got here before immigration restrictions were able to, board a boat with no prior ticket, no application, show up at Ellis Island, and if you don't have certain diseases, you're in. I mean, it was
Oh yeah.
as simple as that. So when people say, "Oh, my ancestors came legally," yeah, well, mine did too. But
Yeah,
basically,
it was
there
not that
was no
hard.
illegal way, right? Right.
The sort of the nation of immigrants concept is sort of over time has been more about, and I think we've seen with people like Stephen Miller and others, it's like immigration itself is bad. Tucker Carlson has gone so far as to be like, um, non-white immigration is affirmatively bad. It changes the nation, causes division. I mean, this is stuff that's
What
like
nation do you think you're in? Like,
it's the 8 o'clock. It's stuff that's the 8 o'clock p.m. hour that people's grandparents are watching, and it's kind of it's scary because that is never it. If you discuss, it's always been there, but now it's sort of almost been at the front of the argument. So the idea that Democrats want non-white immigrants because they will all vote for Democrats, which I don't know, seems a weird statement for Republicans to make. Like, what about? And it's not true. So if you look at a lot of
right,
the data, these folks would potentially be inclined to support Republicans. At least the stuff the Republicans claim to
right,
support. If it's just the Marjorie Taylor Greene stuff, well, probably no, that has a limited audience. But
right.
so it seems as if this humanitarian issue, so seeking
Yeah,
asylum and immigration in general, because um,
and
has been
that
tainted
great.
by this politics.
Sorry for the delay. I feel like I keep interrupting you on the
No,
line.
no.
And this like replacement idea goes back to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories as well, right? Like the some just say these Democrats are trying to get more Democratic voters. And then the next level up in the crazy town conspiracy theory is the Jews are bringing in the Black and brown immigrants to, to make the US a minority white country. And
Hmm.
it's like, okay, well, I guess I personally am doing that, but but it's, when you see that that's not a new idea, that anti-Semitism and racism and xenophobia are all, ancient, and we've been here.
Oh yeah,
We've
it
been
just
here
seems
before.
yeah, a lot of these politicians who are affirmatively will claim they're affirmatively pro-Israel and pro, they say, because is I don't conflate Israel with all Jewish people, but
Nope.
they claim they support Jewish people, and but they will use some of the worst anti-Semitic tropes, especially the idea that a single Jewish man, George Soros, is a fiendish puppet master, this harmless old man, and sort of to the point where um his back, Soros backed, is supposed to be inherently bad. It's just a guy giving money, like, so but a lot of these tropes, and it all traces back to this sort of, as you were saying, this sort of these obvious anti-Semitic tropes and obvious anti-Semitic fears. And again, it just disrupts what should be a fairly, we would hope, straightforward humanitarian process. There's room for a lot of people here, and we could, your job could be much easier, it seems, if we didn't have a lot of these politics involved.
I would love for my job to not be necessary, right? I love my job. I love my work. I don't think that there should be such a thing as a deportation court, or maybe only for Nazis, right? There's a ground of inadmissibility for, like, if you were an actual Nazi in Germany, participated in the war, okay, then you could be deported. And there was one case out of Memphis a couple of years ago where they deported a real life Nazi. He got to live the rest of his life free and hiding in the US, and got deported a couple of years ago here from Memphis. So maybe we keep that part. I would love for, for that part of my job to not exist. And then similarly for folks who are coming here, we've been talking a lot about the humanitarian side, but we're messing things up on the employment side as well. Folks who are coming here to work to be doctors and software engineers and masons and, any other field of work where we need more people, where, one person working creates more jobs and creates more, more good in our communities. Folks are giving up and moving to Canada and Australia and Europe. Our system is, both the law itself is bad, and the administration of the law is so arbitrary and inefficient that it's ruining people's lives, and not respecting their dignity as people. And so we are, again, I don't want to say that immigrants are only for economic benefit, but if we want to stay a leading power in the world, we have to welcome people. That is one of
Mhm.
our strengths as a country. I would
No,
hope, but
I don't think it's necessarily a transactional comment. I mean, when people talk about America, they talk, Americans grow wealth. We're innovators, and the best and the brightest want to be here. And I think that speaks to that. I think perhaps there's this sort of, as you said, the xenophobia, sort of the fear of cultural change, and then the fear of this. These aren't the, as the former president said, they're not sending their best. They're not sending, rapists. Is demonizing the people who are coming here, which
right.
is not, it's not the case. Um, and But I do want, for the time we have left, I do, want to get back to some of the, because it just sat with me, this idea of someone who, from cancer and from potentially being deported, and an extent that these are situations that occur, just seems horrifying. But it's not a one-off thing. That there are a lot of cases where people and their parents, right, are being sent back. Um,
Yes. The week after that, I had a client who similarly had an old deportation order, and ICE asked her to come in to their office with her US citizen children. And I told her, don't bring your kids in. ICE has no right to tell you anything about your US citizen kids. But she was trying to, comply with what she had been asked to do. They detained her with her children and threatened that if she didn't, that she had the choice between bringing them with her or that they would be given to the state, gone into foster care, when in fact their father and adult older sister and grandmother all were available and ready to take care of them at any time. They tricked her into basically into taking her children with her. They detained and deported U.S. citizens, which and that again also was under Biden. I am waiting to see the paperwork with exactly what happened behind the scenes there. They say that they explained, and but why sorry, I get worked up thinking about it, but as you say, that for every example where someone is willing to talk to the media and where there's an attorney able to get some higher up cell phone number on short notice, there are many cases where folks aren't represented or they don't want to speak out because understandably they're afraid of retaliation, or perhaps they don't even believe that it's as extraordinary because they are used to seeing unjust detentions and deportations.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about what you do, Lily, and it's very important work. We're very glad you're doing it. I do hope that the path forward does start to get a little bit smoother. In a general sense, is there anything that people can advocate for that would do that, or beyond? I mean, as you said, your focus isn't politics, but sometimes I just feel like I have to ask if there's something that we are
Sure.
missing on our end that can make this better for people. Like, how can we help?
Yeah, I mean,
Folks?
I think a lot of it goes back to that telling stories to your neighbors, right? If you've got that uncle who is saying that nonsense about, they're coming here taking our jobs, like, tell them about your friend who is, here doing great work and doesn't have his papers because of the, unfair laws. Tell them, the story that you saw in the news about a about a cancer survivor being almost deported, and whether that's where you want your tax dollars to go. Even people who are far gone into the Trump hate and the QAnon BS. I hope that there is room for human connection, to bring folks back from the brink. And then, wherever you are in the U.S., there are awesome community organizers who are doing on the ground work for political change at the city and state and federal levels. So, if they need volunteers or money, that's always good. And nonprofits, obviously, offering legal services. There are several great ones here in the Memphis area, the Mid-South Immigration Advocates, Community Legal Services, Catholic Charities, Latino Memphis, and AIR, Advocates for Immigrant Rights, are all awesome organizations here in Memphis who could all use donations to expand their capacity to serve. Many folks don't know you're not entitled to a lawyer in immigration court, so you either have to pay for one yourself or find a nonprofit with capacity, which can be really, really tough. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me and for your interest in these issues. I hope I didn't sound too dark and depressed. I do.
No. You were appropriately somber, but you gave us some great constructive ways to help and things to understand about. So thank you so much.
Can I say one more thing that makes me optimistic? Is that I love
Please
seeing
do.
that there are awesome bridges, and this is, this work goes back decades, but you see it more and more, bridge building between civil rights organizations, Black Lives Matter, LGBT organizations, and immigrants' rights organizations all recognizing that, our liberation is bound together and that racism affects all of us, that, that violence against LGBT people is violence against immigrants, and vice versa. And um, it is heartening to see, the intersectionality going both ways, right, of immigrants' rights groups connecting broader into the community and finding support as well.
Thank thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. My guest has been Lily Axelrod at Axelrod Immigration Law in Memphis, Tennessee. And thank you again for all the work you do. And for everyone listening, we'll catch you next time. Please like, share, subscribe. And I am the Play Typer Guy on YouTube and Twitter. Take care.